Since 1926, the historic Orpheum Theater in Connecticut has mesmerized audiences with its performances. But when the lights go out and the curtain rises, something else comes alive on that stage. Performers, crew members, and even spectators have vanished without a trace. Always during the third act, witnesses claim to see a figure lurking backstage. Tall, thin, with a smile that should not exist. Anyone who crosses its path in the dark may become part of the show forever. Tonight, you'll uncover the truth behind the legend the Orpheum desperately tries to hide. The shadow doesn't want an audience. It wants you. Subscribe for more real stories and weekly chills. Leave a like if you enjoy mysteries that never found an answer. Would you dare to watch the next show in this theater? Comment below. There are places where the past doesn't rest, where every floorboard holds a secret, every red curtain hides a truth no one wants to discover. The Orpheum Theater, in the heart of Los Angeles, is one of those places. Built in 1926, its Art Deco walls have seen everything. Deafening applause, tears of emotion, the glow of spotlights on stars who touched the sky. But in 1959, something happened there. Something that transformed that temple of the arts into a silent mausoleum. The newspapers of the time spoke of unexplainable tragedy. The police filed the case as unsolved incident. And the survivors, well, the few who remained were never the same again. They speak softly, look over their shoulders, and when asked about that night, their eyes fill with a primal terror. Because at the Orpheum, during any performance, a shadow crosses the stage. It's not an ordinary shadow, projected by light or movement. It's dense, palpable, as if made from all the darkness that ever existed. It moves with purpose, gliding between actors, passing by musicians, ignoring the lights that should dispel it. And then, at some point during the show, it stops. It turns slowly toward the audience. And when it chooses someone, when those invisible eyes fix on a specific person, that person is never seen again. They disappear from their seat before the show ends. No screams, no traces, as if they never existed. Do you believe in curses, in prices that must be paid? At the Orpheum, the curtain rises every night, and the shadow is always there, waiting, choosing, taking. No one knows for certain how many people have disappeared at the Orpheum Theater. Official records speak of 17 confirmed disappearances since 1959, but the oldest employees, those who spent decades sweeping the corridors and adjusting the lights, whisper much higher numbers. 30, 40, perhaps 50. The theater never closed. Not completely. There were attempts, of course. In 1962, after the 5th disappearance, in less than a year, City Hall wanted to seal the doors, but the owners had influence, money, connections that reached all the way to Sacramento. They claimed the disappearances were tragic coincidences, people with mental problems who chose to flee their lives during a moment of collective distraction. The investigation was hushed up. The doors remained open, and the shadow continued choosing. There are always those who don't believe the stories, tourists seeking cheap thrills, skeptical young people who mock the urban legends, theater critics who insist that true art is above superstitions. They buy their tickets, sit in the worn red velvet seats, and wait for the show to begin. Some leave unharmed. Others, well, their seats are empty before the final act, and no one in the audience can remember exactly who was sitting there. It's as if the memory of that person was ripped away, along with their existence. Before you dive into this story, tell me, what city are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. I want to know where you are when the lights go out and the shadow begins to move. Because maybe, just maybe, it's closer than you imagine. Margaret Chun was 32 years old when she accepted the role of Lady Macbeth at the Orpheum Theater. It was October 1959, and this would be her big chance to finally be recognized as a serious actress. After years doing bit parts in mediocre productions and soap commercials for radio, she would finally have the opportunity to show her true talent. The director, a man named Vincent Castellano, was known for his bold and disturbing productions. When he called her for the audition, Margaret felt the universe was finally conspiring in her favor. But from the first rehearsal, something was wrong. The theater had a strange smell, like wilted flowers mixed with old mold. The lights flickered for no apparent reason, and the heating system produced noises that sounded like long, suffering sighs. The other actors whispered quietly about the presence that inhabited the Orpheum, but Margaret refused to listen to foolish superstitions. She was an actress. She dealt with illusion and artifice every day. Ghosts weren't real. It was during the fourth rehearsal that she saw it for the first time. She was in the middle of a monologue, the one where Lady Macbeth tries to wash the imaginary blood from her hands, when she noticed something moving in the corner of the stage, a shadow that didn't correspond to anybody, any light, any physical source. She hesitated, forgot her line for a moment, and Vincent shouted from the back of the audience, "Concentration. Margaret, you're disappointing me?" She apologized and started over, but her eyes kept searching for that dark form that had now disappeared. That night, after rehearsal, she stayed behind while the other actors left as a group, laughing and making dinner plans. Margaret wanted to be alone in the theater, to feel its energy, to connect with the space where she would soon bring to life one of the most complex characters ever written. She walked to the center of the empty stage, closed her eyes, and began to recite her favorite monologue. That's when she felt it, a cold presence behind her, so close she could feel something like breathing against her neck. She turned abruptly, heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the empty theater, the seats covered with white cloths, and that dense silence that seemed to have texture. She laughed at herself, nervously, grabbed her purse, and left. But that night, in her small apartment in Echo Park, Margaret couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that shadow, dense and impossible, moving with purpose. The premiere was scheduled for a Friday, November 13th. Vincent thought the date had perfect theatrical appeal for a dark production of Tickets sold out in days, attracting an unusual mix of Shakespeare aficionados and curious people drawn by the macabre stories surrounding the Orpheum. Margaret arrived at the theater 6 hours before the curtains opened. As she always did on opening nights, she needed the silence, the solitude, the time to completely transform into her character. She did her makeup alone, drawing dark lines around her eyes, leaving her lips pale. She put on the heavy burgundy velvet dress the costume designer had created, and stood before the dressing room mirror, observing the woman looking back. She was no longer Margaret Chun. She was Lady Macbeth, consumed by ambition and guilt. A knock on the door startled her. It was Tommy, the stage assistant, a thin 20-year-old boy with persistent acne and always frightened eyes. "Miss Chun, there's someone wanting to speak with you downstairs, near the stage door." Margaret frowned. She wasn't expecting visitors. "Who is it?" Tommy swallowed hard. She didn't say her name, just said it's important, that it has to do with the theater. Curious and slightly irritated by the interruption, Margaret descended the narrow stairs leading backstage. The area near the stage door was poorly lit, just a weak bulb hanging from the peeling ceiling. And there, standing in the shadow, was a very old woman, bent by age, leaning on a dark wooden cane. Her eyes were milky blue, almost blind, but seemed to see through Margaret in a way that made her shiver. "You shouldn't be here tonight," said the old woman, her voice a rustle of dry leaves. Margaret forced a polite smile. "Excuse me, but who are you, and how did you get in here?" "My name doesn't matter, but I worked in this theater a long time ago. I was here the night it all began." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. The night. What began? The old woman took a step forward, and Margaret could see her face better, marked by deep wrinkles that looked like scars. When the shadow was born, when the price was established. "You feel it, don't you? You know it's here. I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You've seen it during rehearsals. It's already watching you." Margaret felt her mouth go dry. "This is ridiculous."
"Ghosts don't exist."
The old woman let out a hoarse, bitter laugh. "Ghost? Oh, my dear. If it were just a ghost, it would be much simpler. What inhabits this stage is something earlier, something that was waiting for a portal to enter our world. And in 1959, we opened that portal. I was in the play. I was young like you, ambitious like you. We thought we were making art. We didn't know we were making a pact. The minutes passed quickly, and Margaret knew she should be warming up, preparing. But she couldn't pull herself away from this woman, from these words that seemed to echo truths she'd been trying to ignore. What kind of pact? The old woman leaned more heavily on her cane, the director at that time. It wasn't Vincent. It was another man, obsessed with authenticity. He wanted his production of Macbeth to be so powerful it would touch something primal in people. So he brought someone, a man who claimed to know ancient rituals. We performed a ceremony before opening night. We thought it was theater, symbolism, but it wasn't. We invoked something, and this thing, it needs to be fed. Fed with what? Margaret already knew the answer, but needed to hear it. With life, with presence. At every performance, it chooses someone from the audience, someone it senses, someone who has something special. And that person is taken. Not to death, not exactly, to somewhere between worlds, where it slowly feeds on that existence. Margaret stepped back, shaking her head. This is madness. You need to leave. I have an opening in a few hours, and I can single T. ... You think it's a coincidence that this theater never closed? That there's always a production, always an audience. It's because those who control this place know they feed the shadow, so it allows the theater to continue existing. It's a silent, obscene agreement. Margaret turned to leave, but the old woman's hand, surprisingly strong, grabbed her wrist. You can break the cycle if you recognize when it's about to choose. If you confront it directly, maybe you can save them. But it will cost you something. It always costs. Let me go. The old woman obeyed, and Margaret ran up the stairs, heart pounding uncontrollably, the woman's words echoing in her mind like an inevitable omen. When she reached the main stage, Tommy was adjusting the last lights. Miss Chun, are you all right? You look pale. Margaret forced herself to smile. I'm fine, just opening night nerves. But her hands were shaking, and for the first time in her career, she considered running away, abandoning everything, disappearing into that immense and anonymous city. But she didn't run, because Margaret Chun was an actress, and actors don't abandon their roles, no matter how terrified they feel. The doors opened at 7:30, and the audience began to enter. A torrent of animated faces, elegant dresses, the buzz of anticipated conversations. Margaret watched from a crack in the curtain, her stomach churning. How many of these people knew the stories? How many came precisely because of them, seeking the morbid thrill of witnessing something supernatural? And how many were innocent, expecting just a night of good theater? Vincent gathered the cast backstage. His face was radiant, eyes shining with an almost manic intensity. Tonight, you will make history. I want blood. I want passion. I want every person in that audience to feel they're witnessing something visceral and true. The actors murmured their nervous agreement, but Margaret could barely hear him. Her eyes searched to the dark corners of the stage, looking for that impossible form. And then, when the house lights went down and the curtains began to slowly open, she saw it. The shadow was there, standing at the side of the stage, as if wanting denser than the surrounding darkness. It had an almost human form, but distorted, elongated, and Margaret had the absolute certainty that, although it had no visible face, the shadow was looking directly at her. The play began. Macbeth and Banquo entered the scene, their voices echoing through the restored theater. Margaret waited for her cue, heart racing, and when the moment came, she walked onto the stage with firm steps that didn't reveal the terror she felt. During the first act, everything proceeded normally. The lines came out automatically. Her body moved through the rehearsed blocking, but her consciousness remained divided. Part of her in Lady Macbeth, part of her watching that dark presence that now circled the stage like a predator. She saw it from the corner of her eye, always there, always close. But when she tried to look directly, the shadow seemed to partially dissolve, as if it couldn't be fully perceived by direct gazes. It was during the second act, in the scene where Lady Macbeth convinces her husband to commit the murder of the king, that Margaret noticed a change. The shadow stopped circling. It stood still, on the left side of the stage, and slowly, very slowly, began to turn toward the audience. Margaret continued her line, but her words began to come out trembling. She now saw what the old woman had described. The shadow was choosing. She could feel the malevolent intention emanating from that form, an ancient and insatiable hunger. The shadow's invisible eyes swept the rows of spectators, and Margaret realized she could follow its gaze, as if she were connected to that obscene process. The shadow fixed on someone in the 12th row. Margaret could see perfectly a young woman, maybe 25 years old, brown hair pulled into an elegant bun, wearing an emerald green dress. She watched the play with complete attention, absorbed, vulnerable, and the shadow had chosen her. Margaret felt something break inside her. All the old woman's words came back with full force. You can break the cycle if you confront it directly. Maybe you can save them, but it will cost you something. Without thinking, without planning, Margaret interrupted her line in the middle. The actor playing Macbeth, a man named Gerald, looked at her confused. Vincent, from the audience, must have stood up alarmed. But Margaret didn't care. She walked directly to where the shadow was, placed herself between it and the audience, and shouted, her voice echoing through the silent theater. "No, you won't take her." The entire theater seemed to freeze. The audience, confused, didn't know if this was part of the play. The actors were paralyzed backstage, and the shadow, for the first time since Margaret had seen it, reacted directly. It grew. It expanded vertically, becoming a column of darkness that rose to the ceiling beams. And then Margaret felt something she had never experienced before. An absolute cold that penetrated her bones, her mind, her very soul. The shadow was inside her. She fell to her knees on the stage, and as consciousness began to slip away, she had one last vision. The woman in the emerald green dress, still sitting in her seat, alive, present, saved. And then everything went black. When Margaret woke up, she was lying in her dressing room, surrounded by worried faces. Vincent, Gerald, Tommy, all talking at once, asking if she was okay, if she needed a doctor. "The play," she murmured, voice hoarse. What happened with the play? Vincent knelt beside her. "You fainted on stage, Margaret?" It was frightening. But we finished the performance. The audience thought it was part of the production, an experimental choice. They're out there, applauding. It was a success, darling. Margaret closed her eyes, relieved. The woman in the green dress was alive. It had worked, somehow. But then she realized something terrible. She couldn't remember her own mother's face. Didn't remember the house where she grew up. Couldn't recall her first day of school or her first kiss. Parts of her memory, pieces of her own life, had been ripped away as the price for defying the shadow. And she knew, with an icy certainty that settled in her chest, that this had been only the beginning. What Margaret didn't know at that moment, as she tried to gather the scattered fragments of her memory in a dimly lit dressing room at the Orpheum Theater, was that her act of defiance had disturbed a balance maintained for decades. The shadow, for the first time since 1959, had been directly confronted. And this would generate consequences that no one could predict. In the following weeks, strange events would begin to occur, not only in the theater, but also in the lives of all those connected to the production of Macbeth. And Margaret, now marked by the shadow in a way she didn't yet fully understand, would be forced to discover the truth about what really happened on that fateful night in 1959, a truth so disturbing that some had killed to keep it buried. But this would be only the beginning of a journey that would take her far beyond the limits of the Orpheum Theater to the darkest corners of Los Angeles, where ancient rituals were still practiced and where the price for art, for success, and for immortality was measured in souls.